Hello, my friends. Welcome to Timeline English. I am so glad you are here today. Take a slow breath, find a comfortable place, and let this story begin. Imagine a boy, about 9 years old, standing alone on an endless grassland. There is no house in sight, no walls, no family waiting to protect him. Only grass moving in the wind and a sky so wide it seems to swallow the whole world. His father is dead, poisoned by rival clansmen, and now his own people, the very clan his father once led, have abandoned him. They have taken the horses, they have taken the food. They have left this boy, his mother, and his brothers and sisters to survive alone on the open steppe with winter coming. Nobody in this cold, empty world believes this boy will live to see another year. And yet, one day, this same boy will unite 100 warring tribes. He will build the largest connected empire the world has ever known. His name will be feared and respected from one edge of Asia to the gates of Europe. His name was Temujin. Later, the world would know him as Genghis Khan, and his story begins not with power, but with a boy nobody expected to survive. But first, you must understand something about this time and this place. In the 1100s, the Mongolian steppe was not one nation. It was dozens of small clans and tribes, constantly fighting each other over grazing land, horses, and honor. Clan means a group of families connected by blood who live and fight together. Loyalty could change overnight. Alliances were broken as easily as they were made. Life was hard, short, and often violent. Remember this, because it makes everything that follows even more remarkable. The year was around 1162. In a small camp near a river, a baby boy was born. According to legend, he arrived into the world holding a small blood clot in his fist, tightly closed, like a tiny fist gripping a sword. The elders of the clan looked at this and whispered that the child was destined for greatness or for great danger, perhaps both. His father, Yasuge, was a minor chief, respected but not particularly powerful. He named his newborn son Temujin after a rival warrior he had just defeated in battle, a way of claiming the enemy's courage for his own child. For a few short years, Temujin lived an ordinary life for a stepchild. He learned to ride a horse almost before he could properly walk. He learned to shoot a bow. He played with his brothers under the enormous open sky. And among his closest companions during these early years was a boy from a neighboring camp, a boy named Jamukha. Temujin and Jamukha became what the Mongols called Anda, blood brothers, bound not by family, but by a solemn promise of loyalty. According to the customs of the steppe, they exchanged small gifts, knuckle bones for a children's game, an arrowhead, and swore to protect one another for life. For a time, they were inseparable, hunting together, racing their horses across the grass, sharing everything they owned. Neither boy could have known how painfully their two paths would one day divide. But when Temujin was only 9 years old, everything changed. His father took him on a long journey to meet the family of a girl Temujin would one day marry, a girl named Borte. On the way home, Yasuge stopped to share a meal with a group of travelers from a rival tribe, the Tatars. It was considered proper hospitality on the steppe to share food with strangers, even enemies. But these particular Tatars recognized him. Years earlier, Yasuge had raided their people. This was their chance for revenge. Revenge means punishing someone for something they did to you in the past. They secretly poisoned his food. Yasuge felt ill almost immediately after leaving the camp, But he continued riding for days, growing weaker with every mile, determined to reach his family before it was too late. He barely made it home. Within days, he was dead. Temujin was only 9 years old, and just like that, he had lost his father. By the customs of the steppe, Temujin, as the oldest son, should have inherited leadership of his father's small group of followers. But the clan looked at this 9-year-old boy and decided he was too young, too weak to lead them or protect them. Instead of supporting the widow and her children, the clan simply left. They packed their tents. They took the herds of horses and sheep that had belonged to Yesuge, and they rode away, abandoning Temujin, his mother Hoelun, and his 5 younger brothers and sisters, alone on the open steppe with almost nothing. Can you imagine that kind of abandonment? Not just losing a father, but watching your entire community decide you are not worth protecting. Hoelun refused to let her children die. She led them into the wilderness near a mountain called Burkan Khaldun. There, the family survived on almost nothing. They dug for wild roots. They caught small animals. They fished in the cold rivers. Sometimes they went days with barely any food at all. These were the years that shaped Temujin more than any other. He learned that the world would not protect him. He learned that survival depended entirely on his own strength, his own cleverness, and the loyalty of the very few people he could actually trust. And he learned something else, a lesson that would shape the rest of his life. He learned what betrayal felt like, and he promised himself he would never forget it. As a teenager, Temujin's life grew even harder. A rival clan, remembering old grudges against his family, captured him and forced him into slavery. Grudge means anger held against someone for a long time, refusing to forgive them. They placed a heavy wooden collar around his neck, a device meant to prevent escape and to humiliate him in front of the entire camp. Most people in his position would have given up hope, but one night, Temujin saw his chance. During a large celebration, when his captors were distracted and careless with drink, he struck a guard with the wooden collar still around his neck and ran. He hid in a river, submerged up to his neck, breathing through the collar itself as search parties passed within feet of him. Eventually, with the help of a sympathetic family who took a great risk to shelter him, he broke free of the collar entirely and escaped back to his own family. He had survived betrayal. He had survived starvation. Now he had survived slavery, and he was not yet 20 years old. It was around this time that Temujin sought out his old blood brother, Jamukha, once again. Jamukha had grown into a respected leader in his own right, commanding a sizable following of warriors. The 2 young men renewed their childhood bond of Anda, and for a period of years they rode together, hunted together, and fought side by side, their combined followers camping as one large community. When rivals kidnapped Temujin's new wife, Porte, it was Jamukha who rode beside him to win her back, their combined forces overwhelming the raiders and returning her safely. In these years, it seemed as though the 2 blood brothers might build something great together, side by side, as equals. But equality on the steppe rarely lasted. As the years passed, more and more warriors began quietly leaving Jamukha's camp to follow Temujin instead. This was not, by most accounts, something Temujin deliberately engineered against his old friend. It happened simply because of how each man led. Jamukha ruled largely through the old system, favoring those born into noble families. Temujin, shaped by his own years of abandonment and hardship, rewarded loyalty and skill wherever he found it, regardless of a warrior's birth. Warriors talk. Word spreads across a grassland faster than almost anything else, and slowly the balance of power between the 2 blood brothers tipped quietly and then decisively, toward Temujin. Jamukha watched his own influence shrink, and something that had once been brotherly affection curdled over time into bitter jealousy. Eventually, the two former blood brothers became open enemies, leading opposing coalitions of tribes into direct battle against one another. The wars between them were long and difficult, filled with betrayals on both sides. But gradually, tribe by tribe, Temujin's coalition grew stronger while Jamukha's crumbled. In the end, several of Jamukha's own remaining followers, hoping to win favor, turned against their leader and delivered him, captured, into Temujin's hands. According to the old accounts, Temujin offered his former blood brother a final chance at reconciliation, an offer to join him rather than die. Jamukha refused. He asked instead for an honorable death, one that would not spill his blood upon the ground, the traditional Mongol way of showing respect to a worthy enemy. Temujin granted this final request. It is said that Temujin mourned him privately afterward. The boy who had once shared knucklebones and arrowheads with him under the open sky, now gone forever by his own order. Few stories capture more painfully what this rise to power actually cost the man who achieved it. Over the following years, Temujin fought, negotiated, and outmaneuvered rival after rival across the Mongolian steppe. Some enemies he defeated in battle. Others he convinced to join him peacefully, offering fair treatment in exchange for loyalty, an offer many desperate smaller clans found impossible to refuse after generations of endless warfare. He was not a gentle man. His enemies who resisted him faced brutal consequences, and Mongolian tradition itself was harsh in ways that can be difficult to imagine today. But among those who joined him, he built something the steppe had never truly known before: real, lasting unity. By the year 1206, after decades of struggle, something extraordinary happened. Representatives from every major tribe on the Mongolian steppe gathered together at a great assembly called a kurultai. Kurultai means a formal gathering of Mongol leaders to make major decisions. There, at this historic meeting, the tribes who had spent generations fighting and killing one another declared Temujin their supreme ruler. They gave him a new name, Genghis Khan, often translated as universal ruler or fierce ruler. The boy who had been abandoned on the open steppe at 9 years old, the teenager who had escaped slavery with a wooden collar still around his neck, the man who had ordered the death of his own brother. He was now the single ruler of a unified Mongol nation, something that had never existed in this form before. But uniting the Mongol tribes, as remarkable as it was, turned out to be only the very beginning. Genghis Khan quickly reorganized his people into a powerful, disciplined military force unlike anything the world had seen. He broke apart the old clan loyalties that had caused so much endless infighting and organized his warriors instead into units of 10, 100, and 1,000, mixing different clans together deliberately so that loyalty flowed upward to him personally, not sideways to old tribal rivalries. He also commissioned the creation of a written script for the Mongolian language, adapted from the alphabet of the Uyghur people, since the Mongols had never before possessed a formal writing system of their own. For the first time, laws, messages, and records could be written down and understood consistently across an empire that stretched further than any single writer could easily travel. Mongol warriors trained from childhood as horsemen and archers. Archer means a soldier who fights using a bow and arrow. They could ride for days across enormous distances, living largely off what their horses provided, striking enemy cities with a speed no other army on earth could match. And Genghis Khan turned this speed outward, first against the Western Shah kingdom, then against the powerful Jin dynasty of northern China, one of the wealthiest and most heavily fortified states in the world at that time. The Jin campaign tested Genghis Khan's forces in ways the open steppe never had. Northern China was full of massive walled cities, far larger and better defended than anything the Mongols had faced before. Rather than retreat from this challenge, Genghis Khan adapted. He captured Chinese engineers and incorporated their knowledge of siege warfare, catapults, battering rams, and eventually early gunpowder weapons into his own army's growing arsenal. Arsenal means the full collection of weapons and equipment available to a military force. City after city that resisted him fell, sometimes after prolonged and devastating sieges. The great capital of the Jin dynasty, the city of Zhongdu, near the location of modern-day Beijing, eventually fell to Mongol forces after a long and punishing siege. Its capture a clear sign that even the mightiest walled cities of the era could not stand forever against this new kind of army. Word of the Mongol army's speed and ferocity spread far ahead of the army itself, and increasingly, cities began surrendering before a single arrow was fired, simply out of terror at what they had heard. Then, in the year 1218, a fateful decision changed the direction of world history entirely. Genghis Khan sent a peaceful trade caravan, merchants, not soldiers, toward the wealthy Khwarazmian Empire to the west, hoping to open trade between the two powers. Caravan means a group of traders and their goods traveling together, usually across long distances. The governor of a border city, for reasons still debated by historians, had the entire caravan seized and every single merchant executed, accusing them without evidence of being spies. Genghis Khan, seeking justice rather than war, sent ambassadors demanding an apology and the punishment of the governor responsible. Ambassador means an official messenger sent to represent a ruler in negotiations with another power. The Khwarazmian ruler's response was to execute the ambassadors as well and send back the severed head of one of them as a message of contempt. Contempt means a feeling of complete disrespect towards someone. This was, without question, one of the worst diplomatic decisions in recorded history. Genghis Khan turned the full, terrifying force of his unified Mongol army westward. The great trading cities of the Khwarazmian Empire, Bukhara, Samarkand, and Urgench, cities famous across the medieval world for their wealth, their libraries, and their beautiful architecture, fell one after another in a campaign of astonishing speed. According to accounts written by survivors, when Bukhara fell, Genghis Khan reportedly addressed the terrified citizens gathered before him, telling them, in essence, that their own leader's arrogance had brought this catastrophe upon them, that he had come as the consequence of their ruler's own actions rather than as an unprovoked aggressor. Whether these exact words were truly his, historians cannot say for certain, but the message these accounts preserve reflects how Genghis Khan appeared to genuinely view the campaign, not as random cruelty, but as a response, however devastating, to what he considered an unforgivable insult. Within just a few short years, the once mighty Khwarazmian Empire, one of the great powers of the Islamic world, simply ceased to exist as an independent nation. Historians still debate exactly how many people died during these campaigns. Some cities that resisted were destroyed with a completeness that shocked the medieval world. Whole regions of Central Asia would take generations to recover. This is the side of Genghis Khan's story that is impossible to soften, and we should not pretend otherwise. War on this scale caused enormous human suffering. But this same conquest also, almost accidentally, connected East and West more directly than at any previous point in human history. Under Mongol rule, the ancient network of trade routes known as the Silk Road became safer and more heavily traveled than ever before. Merchants, ideas, technologies, and even diseases moved between China, Persia, and Europe with a speed that had simply never been possible before. Historians sometimes call this period Pax Mongolica, a Latin phrase meaning Mongol peace, because for merchants and travelers within its borders, the Mongol Empire, despite the brutality of its conquest, provided genuine safety and stability across thousands of miles. Genghis Khan also built an extraordinarily effective relay messenger system, later known as the Yam, with fresh horses and riders stationed at regular intervals across the empire, allowing messages that once took months to arrive in a matter of days. Some historians consider it one of the most advanced communication networks the world had ever seen up to that point. And, as his empire expanded, Genghis Khan increasingly relied on marriage alliances to hold his growing territories together. His daughters were married to the rulers of allied and conquered kingdoms, placed strategically to govern regions and secure loyalty far from the Mongol homeland. A network of family ties stretching across an empire so vast it would have been impossible to control through military force alone. Genghis Khan also did something else that surprised many outside observers at the time. Although he practiced his own traditional beliefs, he generally allowed religious freedom throughout his growing empire. Buddhists, Christians, Muslims, and followers of many other faiths were permitted to practice openly, so long as they remained loyal to Mongol rule. He also created a written legal code known as the Yasa, establishing rules that applied to every person in the empire, from the lowest herder to Genghis Khan's own family members. Under this code, certain crimes, including theft and betrayal of trust between allies, the very things Temujin himself had suffered as a child, were punished with particular severity. As Genghis Khan grew older, he faced a challenge that troubles nearly every powerful ruler eventually, who would inherit what he had built. He had 4 sons with Borte, Yochi, Chagatai, Ogedei, and Tolui, but a bitter rivalry, rooted partly in doubts about Yochi's parentage following Borte's earlier kidnapping, had grown between the 2 eldest brothers, Jochi and Chagatai. Recognizing that this rivalry could tear his empire apart after his death, Genghis Khan made a careful decision. Rather than naming either quarreling brother as his successor, he chose his 3rd son, Ogedei, known for his more even temperament, as the next great Khan. Dividing rule of the wider territories among all 4 sons as a compromise designed to preserve unity rather than provoke another civil war. By the final years of his life, Genghis Khan ruled over more connected land than any single person in human history had ever controlled before him, stretching from the Pacific coast of China to the shores of the Caspian Sea. The boy who once had nothing, not even the protection of his own clan, now ruled an empire so vast that a messenger could ride for months and never reach its edge. In 1227, while leading a final military campaign against the Western Shah kingdom, Genghis Khan died. Historians still debate the exact cause. Some records mention a fall from his horse. Others suggest illness. He was likely around 65 years old. True to the secrecy that had surrounded much of his life, his followers kept his death hidden for weeks, killing anyone they encountered on the journey home. According to legend, to prevent word from spreading before his chosen successor was ready. Successor means the person who takes over a position of leadership after someone else. To this day, historians and treasure hunters do not know the exact location of his grave. According to tradition, his burial party diverted a river over the site itself, then planted trees across the entire area deliberately erasing any trace of where the most powerful man in the world was laid to rest. Perhaps it is fitting. A boy who was once left with nothing, hidden away in the wilderness simply to survive, chose in the end to disappear back into the very land that had once tried to destroy him. After his death, his empire did not collapse, as so many empires do when their founder dies. Instead, under his sons and grandsons, it continued to expand even further, eventually becoming the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever known. Contiguous means connected together without any break or gap in between. His son, Ogedei, completed the destruction of the Jin dynasty in northern China, finishing the campaign his father had begun decades earlier. Mongol armies under brilliant generals like Subutai pushed even further west than Genghis Khan himself had ever traveled, sweeping into Russia and Eastern Europe, defeating combined European armies in Poland and Hungary, and reaching the edges of Western Europe itself before internal Mongol politics eventually drew those armies back east. In the decades that followed, the empire divided into several great khanates, the Golden Horde ruling over Russia and parts of Eastern Europe, the Ilkhanate governing Persia and much of the Middle East, and, most famously, the empire of his grandson Kublai Khan, who completed the conquest of southern China, founded the Yuan dynasty, and built a magnificent new capital that would one day grow into the city we now know as Beijing. Under this vast network of connected Mongol territories, technologies and ideas that had developed separately in China, Persia, and Europe finally began moving freely between civilizations, paper money, printing techniques, gunpowder weapons, and advances in astronomy and mathematics all traveled these newly secured trade routes. It was along these very roads, protected by Mongol authority, that European travelers like Marco Polo would later journey deep into Asia and return home with stories that reshaped how Europe understood the wider world. And so, my friends, the story of Genghis Khan comes quietly to its close. A boy who lost his father at 9 years old. A boy abandoned by his own people, left to survive on wild roots and small fish in a freezing river. A boy who wore a slave's wooden collar around his neck and escaped it with nothing but his own will to live. A young man who lost his closest friend to the very ambition that built his empire. And yet, he became the ruler of the largest connected empire in human history. A man whose decisions still shape the borders and cultures of Asia today, nearly 800 years after his death. He made a choice again and again, through every betrayal, every loss, every impossible circumstance. He chose not to be destroyed by what the world had done to him. He chose, instead, to build something enormous out of nothing. Now, my friend, I want to say something to you. You are making a choice too. Every time you press play on a story like this, you are choosing something. You are choosing to grow. You are choosing to learn. You are choosing to give your time and your effort to something that is not easy, but something that matters. Learning English is not easy. There are days when the words feel heavy, when progress feels impossibly slow, when you feel completely alone with the difficulty of it, the way a 9-year-old boy once stood alone on an endless, empty steppe with no one left to help him. But look at what Temujin built from nothing at all. He had no wealth, no army, no protection, and no guarantee that tomorrow would be any easier than today. What he had was patience and a refusal to stop trying. You are building something too. Every word you understand, every story you follow from beginning to end, every sentence that becomes a little clearer, that is proof. Proof that you are stronger and more capable than you think. Temujin turned complete abandonment into the foundation of an empire. You are turning quiet, patient effort into a future built on a language that will open doors you cannot yet fully imagine. Keep listening, keep learning, keep going. This is Timeline English. If Temujin's story moved you today, please leave a comment below. Tell me, what is the hardest thing you have ever had to survive? And what did it teach you? I would love to hear your thoughts. There are many more stories waiting right here. Come back soon, my friend.